People up. So we will start. Michelle, if you want to take us live.
Okay.
Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first briefing for the Montgomery County Local Delegation House Land Use, Transportation, and Public Safety Committee. I am Sarah Love, and I'm excited to be the chair for this year. This briefing will be on the draft environmental impact study for the I-495, I-270P3 project. And here today to talk to us about this DEIS is Carol Rubin, who is the Special Project Manager for the Managed Lanes Study, and Casey Anderson, who is the chair of the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. So, Casey, you want to start us off, please?
Thanks for having us. I'll get right to it. The draft EIS really starts to clarify some of the reasons why, or the relationships among the different moving parts of this project, or the lack thereof. From the point when the state was scoping the purpose and need of the project, we anticipated that their attempts to define the objectives in a way that would lead to the conclusion that you could only meet those goals with lane widenings on the interstate and not consider a transit alternative, consider other possible road solutions even, would ultimately play out in the draft EIS. And I think that that's what's happened. So on the one hand, we are trying to preserve the record and our rights on a whole range of issues, particularly including the ones that most directly and concretely affect issues under our jurisdiction, like protecting parkland, but also to try to highlight the ways in which this project has really been designed in order to exclude serious consideration of alternatives that do not involve widening all the roads. And I think Carol can talk about this a little bit more, but I've tried to focus in our public testimony on the bigger picture ideas about how the state has defined away these alternatives and in a way that's procedurally, we don't think, legally defensible. In particular, now that it's become clear from the draft EIS that it would be very difficult or impossible to pay for the managed lanes project, just the road widenings, with toll revenue, that really calls into question the decision to exclude transit at the outset of the project on the grounds that it didn't pay for itself. In addition to that, it calls into question whether or not the state's assurances more recently in response to the Board of Public Works and other input from the state legislature, the General Assembly, as well as from local government organizations like us and outside advocacy organizations, their commitments to seriously consider transit as at least a component of this project are called into question by the economic, the revenue forecasts, and the failure to include costs like utility relocations, which really make it hard to see how they could possibly pay for the road widenings with toll revenue, and not only could you not pay for it with the revenue that's available from tolls, but how it would be possible to allocate any additional amount of revenue from tolls to transit or other alternatives that might mitigate the environmental impact. So Carol, who's really one of the finest lawyers I've ever worked with, and we're really lucky to have her on the team, is really tried to make sure that we don't lose track of the details, legally speaking, and that we document our case for the record. But also, I think that we want to remember the bigger picture here is making sure that this project, if it happens, is consistent with the broader land use and transportation goals that we have as a county, and that the state has professed to try to pursue for many years around smart growth, transit-oriented development, compact form land use, avoiding sprawl, reducing vehicle miles traveled, all those sorts of issues. So thanks for inviting us, and I'll turn that over to Carol, who will tell me if I've erred in my summary of any of that.
Thanks, Casey. Not at all. I'm going to kind of talk a little bit more, give a little more detail to what you've indicated. And what I'd like to do is just go through a really quick kind of summary of what we believe the issues are. And I do want to open it up, have questions that I can answer if you have any specific concerns. But the first thing I want to do is I just want to put into context that this is a part of the NEPA review. Because as you know, the Board of Public Works approved under the procurement aspect, or the P3 Act, the only going forward with phase 1. And phase 1 of that project is the American Legion Bridge going north, taking the Western Spur up to 70, all the way to Frederick. That is phase 1 of the Board of Public Works implementation project. I'm going to call it the Western Corridor, because that's what we've referred to it in many of our documents. And as you know, that's divided into 2 NEPA studies. So the 2 NEPA studies, one has begun, the other has not yet, is the Managed Lanes Project, which goes from the American Legion Bridge up through 270, up to 370, and then all the way around 495 to exit 5. So in Prince George's County. So what happened is this review and the DEIS covers the managed lane study, that southern portion of phase 1, as well as all of 495 in one fell swoop. So it's essentially looking for the permitting application through the federal government to move forward. It isn't the implementation that's required under state law. They'll have to take another step of that. And the reason I say that is because I would suggest that probably 90% of our concerns in specific areas have to do with the NEPA portion of the project that is not covered in phase 1, that the state has not authorized, the Board of Public Works has not authorized moving forward on the P3 with. But the problem is that for those of you who are want to see movement of the phase 1 portion of the project, which was included in our land use documents, in the local government's land use documents for some kind of expansion of 270, that is going to be held up as part of, because it's included with the 495 issue. So that's a concern that we have, because what it does is it really, I think it's pitting 2 things against one another. It will cause a delay on a portion of the project that may be okay to go forward with. So let me essentially just talk about the schedule for a second so that you can understand where we are. There have been, the State Highway Administration has begun online public hearings. 2 are complete. There's another one tomorrow, and then September 1st, September 3rd, and September 10th will be in their full-day hearings, and people call in and reserve time. The close of the public comment period is currently October the 8th. And I know that some of you have received many letters and have heard that asking for delay. Some of you have asked for that delay or an extension of that public comment period because the document is so unwieldy. And it's very difficult to review it and provide comment within that 90-day period, which is the date it was issued to October 8th. There was also another problem, and I saw that Sierra Club is getting ready to, or actually, probably about 12 different organizations are going to be writing a letter to you all asking again for an extension, just so you understand what happened. The State Highway Administration published the DEIS, downloaded it, and indicated to the public it's ready for review. They did that on July the 10th. There was apparently some, or at least what we're hearing from them, is that there was some glitch in the download, and therefore approximately 1,700 pages or 10% of the document was not included in the download, So anyone who was reviewing it from that first publication, which of course we downloaded it onto our own system so that we could focus it without having to go to the State Highway Administration's website all the time. They missed that, and then they re-downloaded the DEIS the next day, but they never told anyone. And there are at least 10 organizations that I know of that were relying on the one that was published on July the 10th and did not have the more voluminous document. So Casey, in his testimony, asked for an extension to begin when they indicate what the changes were to the DEIS. And I think that's what everyone else is asking for. So you'll be getting a letter that thanks you for asking for an extension, but talks about the need to have an additional extension because of this error. And it's not so much that they intentionally or unintentionally extended the document. It's that they never noticed anyone. There's still no notice on their website or anywhere. And the only way that was found out was by an investigation. Somebody counted all the pages. So that's an issue that we're dealing with right now. The phase 1 north portion of the project, which is the 270 from 370 to Frederick, is the start of that NEPA process. They've been in pre-NEPA. The start of that process is supposed to be at the end of September. They're supposed to announce letter of intent so that the two phases for implementation can catch up with one another. They have not, State Highway has not indicated its preferred alternative of the 7 alternatives that are on the table. They're asking, they want to wait until they get all the public comment, and they're going to issue that their recommended preferred alternative in the winter of this year, end of this year, beginning of 21, and they're expecting to select their P3 partner, and also at the same time issue the final environmental impact statement and the record of decision, which is what the P3 partner has to comply with in terms of regulatory aspects in the spring or summer of 2021. So that's where we're moving. It's moving very quickly. And anyway, so that's the schedule, so you understand in context. So I want to talk a little bit about the financial viability, because I did send out the staff report that I issued to the planning to the commission, as well as the briefing that we provided. Did not talk about the financial aspects of it, but as Casey said, that is an overarching problem. It was not that clear in the administrative draft, which is why we didn't pick it up. But to be clear, the State Highway in the DEIS specifically says that their financial analysis is based on preliminary capital costs, preliminary operations and maintenance, and construction methods. So what we've got is what's not said. And what's not said is there are many project costs that are not included in these preliminary costs. So we don't know how that's going to be paid for, and it would obviously be part of the draft of the P3 agreement. But as Casey indicated, the WSSC costs were not included. There are, and as I'll talk to you about our major concerns, they have failed to identify any of or most of the cultural and historic resources and the cost that the project would incur to mitigate for those resources. We don't even know what they are to understand how they're going to be impacted. And that's not just the commission's owned, the publicly owned resources. There are a significant number of privately owned cultural and historic resources. I spoke to Delegate Love about this earlier, I guess last week. There's a there's a historically Black community in Carderock that is the current design, the preliminary design, the boundaries obliterate that cemetery, and the cemetery has about more than 80 grave sites. It hasn't really been identified properly, and how they're going to address dealing with that that cemetery, and particularly in today's age of, and we'll get into this as part of the insufficient equity, social equity, and social justice analysis, but that's part of it, where they have failed to identify some of these resources. The other costs, the mitigation costs are on the natural resources are unknown at this time because the limit of this, because the P3, the private party, is tasked with the responsibility, or will be tasked with the responsibility to design the project. The only way that the State Highway Administration can identify what they believe the mitigation or the resources that need to be mitigated for or dealt with is by drawing a limit of disturbance or a boundary within which they are going to mandate or require that the P3 design their project inside that LOD. So they're just assuming that that area will be obliterated, and therefore it has impact to, that's the impact, loss of those resources. And I'll talk about that, it's insufficient for a number of reasons. But I'll get into that when I talk about the specific issues. So we think that there's no way for them to properly identify the costs of the environmental mitigation also. And then what is really important is lessons learned from the Purple Line. As you know, the Purple Line's cost overruns that we're currently dealing with right now, or the state is dealing with the concessionaire, is that there are delays. There are delays that have caused cost overruns, and those delays are as a result of litigation, redesign, and property acquisition difficulties. All three of those problems exist already in this managed lane study. We already know that there is going to be significant litigation because of all of the unknown impacts that we're going to have, particularly to the natural resources. There's going to be need for, they haven't even designed the project, so we know there's going to be designs and redesigns, and they don't even have a design in order to identify what the time frame would be to get it approved, as well as the property acquisition problems. And one of the most difficult property acquisition issues is going to be with the Park and Planning Commission. And that's because the commissioners have a state mandated, under state law, there's very, very specific requirements and findings that have to be made by the commissioners to approve a change in use from parkland to transportation. And without that level of comfort, they just can't legally approve the disposition of that property. There's also the Capper-Crampton Act, which I think you've heard which was the initial funding for most of the stream valley that is going to Rock Creek, Sligo Creek, that is going to be impacted. So it's not only the commission, the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission must approve those changes, but then we have to go to the National Capital Planning Commission and get their approval. So there's a whole other step, and there's a whole other review. So there's going to be a lot of difficulty, we believe, and we don't think that they've actually considered the time and the elements with regard to that, because the commission, the Park and Planning Commission, is not satisfied that any of their review, the way that they've approached the project, is appropriate. And therefore, to ask us to just, turn property over for this project is going to be, it's an uphill battle. So, and then finally, in the cost that Casey didn't talk about, was we believe that the revenues from the tolls are overstated. And if you look at what's going on in the world today, they haven't considered, and we understand that because it came up after they had already drafted the DEIS. But to ignore the impact from COVID and to ignore what's going to the changes that might be made to traffic, to the needs for this particular project is we think is short-sighted and isn't going to be, look, a lot of the toll road partnerships, public-private partnerships, they're bonds throughout the country. The bonds are being downgraded. They've asked for government bailout in many cases. And we've looked at a numerous number of studies that aren't necessarily dealing just with this project, but there are studies out there that are saying that if you reduce the vehicle miles traveled by about 8-9%, then it would reduce congestion by 35%. And the other question is if that congestion is reduced, what does that do? And these are University of Maryland studies and KPMG studies. You know, what does that do to the toll revenue expectations? So that is also, I think, short-sighted in their real cost of financial viability of this project. And we're concerned, as you all should be, that it's just going to come back on the taxpayers to fund a portion of this project that has never been kind of really looked at. So with that, that's kind of putting this project in a major context. But the major issues, and the reason I want to address just the major issues, there's like 9 of them, is because there are so many other issues that we're dealing with. So you're aware that when we reviewed originally an administrative draft of the DEIS, which was provided to us as a cooperating agency in January, we provided over 300 comments in February. We received response to those comments in July the 9th, actually. And now we're looking at those again to figure out whether they're going to, most of them they're not dealing with. I know of, the only one I know of that they have affirmatively agreed to provide is the bike and ped access and crossings to allow to break down some of the some of the barriers created by the highways. But we don't know where, we don't know how. The only one they've affirmatively identified is the American Legion Bridge. So, but nothing else has been, none of our other comments are important comments have really been addressed. Or, you know, they keep kicking the can down the road and saying, we'll deal with that in the FEIS, or we'll deal with that in the negotiations with the private partner. And that just doesn't give us any breathing space or any kind of, I guess, trust in State Highway, because we've had so many other problems with them in this process. So if I can run through those major issues real quickly, and that will leave you plenty of time for questions, because I know that that's really where you want to go. The first one is, and this goes to, I'm gonna take a little out of order so that it is a little clearer. There's a parks policy and a legal requirement under the transportation, or the federal transportation law called 4F, which says that first, the obligation when you have impact to environmental resources is that the first thing, and also cultural and historic resources, is the first thing you have to do is you have to take reasonable measures to avoid the impact. In other words, look at alternatives that would have less impact on the environment or on those other resources. If you cannot avoid, if there's no reasonable way to avoid it, then you look to minimize or reduce the impact. And then once you've gotten to the reduction in your impact as much as you can, you address it through mitigation. And that's the mitigation plan that will be required in the final environmental impact statement. So the problems, so what that does is that brings to light a couple other things. Like number one, we believe that the alternative that they called the Maryland 200 diversion alternative, which is taking the ICC, which is already built and has already addressed all of this, all the environmental impacts, we do not believe that they have properly analyzed using the ICC to avoid the congestion on 495 between the parallels, kind of parallels that the ICC from 95 to 270. We do not believe that they've really analyzed that properly in a number of ways. And the most difficult one is that they did say it met their purpose and need. It reduced the traffic on 495, and financially it was viable. But what they said was it wasn't as good as the other alternatives. But that doesn't matter. It's a question of, does it meet that purpose and need? Does it get to a point where perhaps the congestion on 495 is reduced to a level that you don't need to widen it by 4 lanes, which is really probably where they're going. The other thing that they did, which we thought was a little bit strange, was that they added in their model of the ICC, they added the section of 95 between the ICC and 495. And they added managed lanes to that section of 95. And the problem with that is that all of the environmental impacts that you avoid by staying off of 495 and just dealing with the built highway of the ICC is lost because of Paint Branch. So all the environmental impact is as a result of adding that section of 95. And the other reason that you don't want to add 95 to the project is that it has a natural bottleneck from a planning perspective. You want to create the incentive, the motivation for people to use the ICC rather than coming down and using 495 because the ICC is tolled entirely. But the question is, does it have to remain tolled? Can they have some free lanes on the ICC? Can they do, signage that would move people to the ICC? None of this was addressed. So we don't think that they've really looked at the ICC as an appropriate avoidance technique, and therefore they haven't met their obligation for that avoidance policy. So again, how do the commissioners reach the conclusion that they have addressed the policy and requirements of the law in order to convey that property? So it all ties together in that way. The other issue where the avoidance and minimization problem occurs is that the LOD, the limits of disturbance that was designed by State Highway, was done at a very, very preliminary and rudimentary level. It's most of the time when we're looking at road projects to understand the design, the impacts, and other things, we look at it at a 30 to 35% design stage where engineering has been done, et cetera. They're at about the 1 to 2% stage. It's a planning level design. And we believe that the planning level design is inappropriate because we think they've minimized it to get a quantitative reduction rather than a qualitative reduction. In other words, oh, look, instead of impacting 300 acres, we're only impacting 45 or 80 acres. I don't have the numbers in front of me, I apologize. But it doesn't matter because it's not about how many acres you impact. It's about the qualitative impacts. It's about taking, these critical waterways and stream valleys, like in Rock Creek, and making them so that, you either have to reroute Rock Creek or you impact the life within it changes the whole character of the stream. It changes the surrounding areas. So we think that we do believe that their minimization is inappropriate, and it's going to have to be widened more. We don't believe that a design can come forward that's going to stay within that limit of disturbance and not have impacts to the resources. As I said earlier, they failed to identify many of the historic and cultural resources, which again, that will widen the limits of disturbance. And the access points and the way that they have designed access to the managed lanes will also have to be changed. Interestingly enough, most of the design that they have come up with for access doesn't allow users, users of the highway to go from the free lanes to the managed lanes and make that flow. It requires that somebody make a decision before they get on the highway. Am I going to use the managed lanes or am I going to use the general purpose lanes? Because the only way on or off the managed lanes is a separate ramping system. So somebody, and I'll use an example, there is no access planned or designed right now for either Rockville Pike or, there's nothing for Rockville Pike. okay? Rockville Pike was designed as the major entry to downtown Bethesda. It also has significant facilities, government facilities there with NIH and Walter Reed. Well, how do you get there if you take the managed lanes? You either have to get off at Connecticut Avenue, which means that, and nobody's going to get off at Connecticut Avenue and then get back on for one, on the general purpose to get into to get to 355, and or you can get off at Georgetown Parkway, and if you do that again, you're changing the entire traffic patterns of the local roads, because all those people who take the managed lanes can't use 355. They have to get off at Connecticut, or they have to get off at Georgetown Parkway. And so it changes Cedar Lane, it changes Jones Bridge. It's just, so the question is, why is it designed that way, and why, and what is that going to do to the actual limits of disturbance at the end of the day if the P3 comes in and says, oh, we can't, that's not going to work. We're going to have to widen 355. And then when you do that, it changes everything. So those are the reasons directly that we have some real problems with that. I talked about Capper Crampton. Another major problem we have is their social equity and their social justice review that is required under NEPA is supposed to help. It's supposed to be a factor in deciding the best course. What is the best, what is the preferred alternative? So that you have to identify the impact to those marginal communities and figure out how to make sure that they have the same rights to use it, or that it doesn't improperly or, imbalanced impact to those communities. The answer in the DEIS, and the answer to our comment about that, was that they're going to deal with that after they decide which is the preferred alternative in the design. But the problem with that is you're supposed to make that decision as a factor in how you select your preferred alternative. It's not supposed to be, let's put a Band-Aid on it after. I mean, that's the whole problem with the inequity and the racial injustice we have today, is that none of that was considered in the fundamental decision making. It's all like, okay, now we have to go back and fix it all. And as we all know, it creates geometric problems. So we don't believe that they've addressed any of the social equity requirements of NEPA. I do have to provide them kudos for agreeing to put bicycle and pedestrian over the American Legion Bridge, but they have not yet agreed to design it in a way that would accommodate rail. If they're ever going to they talk about multimodal, if we're ever going to be able to create the kind of public transportation system in this area that we need into the future, you have to design the American Legion Bridge that will accommodate rail. It doesn't have to put it on there now. The Woodrow Wilson Bridge can accommodate rail, and they're going to decide at some point how to best do that to connect to connect by metro over the Potomac in those areas, but they haven't committed to it. And so to us, that's a major problem. We just really have two more. One is that they have failed to respect the local jurisdiction's land use preferences. Casey talked about that earlier. It also goes, another example is that almost every master plan in Montgomery County considers non-auto driver mode share as not only a primary metric, but a goal. And that is like a word, that's a phrase that doesn't even exist in the DEIS. So they haven't even looked at what our kind of local planning priorities are to kind of figure out the best way to do this, meet their purpose and need. And then finally, under stormwater management, major problem. The stormwater management system, there is no stormwater management in either of 270 and 495. Some of 270 has it, some of the newer areas, but 495 has no stormwater management in any of to deal with the impervious surfaces. So all of the runoff that comes from that highway goes right into the streams. And these are critical urban streams that, can't be replaced. And so what they've agreed to do is follow the current requirements, which is that they only have to address 50% of the reconstructed impervious areas. And that means that the only thing they're going to address, that they've committed to address in the DEIS, is they will, for the existing, they have to deal with, the stormwater management for the new expanded portion. But everything this is the time for them, if they're going to be building on that highway, then fix the problems that exist there now. Because if not, it's going to be left to the local jurisdictions to deal with it. And we can't clean those natural resources, those critical streams, with constant degradation going on. So the only thing that they have to address in existing under the law is they only have to address 50% of the reconstructed areas, impervious surfaces. And what that means is only those areas that they remove the impervious surfaces or the road beds to expose bare earth. And I think we all know that they're not going to be exposing bare earth to most of the existing roadway because of what that would do during the construction. And, it would make those lanes, you wouldn't be able to use those lanes. So the construction so the stormwater management is wholly deficient. So with that, now I will say there have been a lot of other comments by a lot of other organizations or citizens that we're following, and we may adopt some of those into our formal response. I've gotten all the written materials, and I'm watching all the hearings and working with both the Montgomery County Department of Transportation and the County Council. So we're trying to coordinate all of that. So there are other issues, and with that, that gives us time to open up if you have any questions or want clarifications.
Carol, thank you so much. I really appreciate all your work on this. And Casey, thank you also for your comments. We really appreciate your time this morning. Colleagues, if you have questions, you can either put them in the chat, type question in the chat, or use the hand raised function. And I see that Chair Corman has a question. Mark, you want to go ahead?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everybody. Carol, two questions, one of which I apologize you might have covered. I had to go deal with a day job email in the middle of your presentation. So the first one is, draft EISs don't have to identify a preferred alternative. But when there is a preferred alternative, they are supposed to identify it. Correct. And in this case, if I'm remembering numbers correctly, alternative 9 is obviously the preferred alternative. Everything outside of the draft EIS tells us that that's the preferred alternative. So is that an issue that they have not, been forthright legally, do you think? Is that a flaw, or is it just doesn't matter? It's, it's a game everybody plays.
Well, the interesting part about the preferred alternatives, okay, including 9, is that other than what they added later, which is called 9M, which is 9 modified, where it's the 2 lanes in either direction with hot, in other words, high occupancy vehicles. We don't know whether it's going to be 2 or 3 required. We'll be able to use the managed lanes without charge. Okay. It's 2 lanes everywhere in each direction. So that's 4 lanes, except that critical part of 495 where they drop it to 1 lane. Okay. So understand that's the difference. So 9 has the 2 lanes everywhere, and 9M has 1 lane in a portion. One of the issues that we raised in the ARDS is that because the only difference between any of their alternatives is operational. The footprint of every single alternative is the same. So the impact, if you think about it that way, the impact to the environmental resources, the cultural and historic resources, the private property is the same for every single alternative. So who cares what the preferred alternative is? They're all going to have the same impact. That's what we think we think that that's a legal problem, because NEPA was designed in order to look at alternatives that have differences so that you can balance your transportation needs, in this case, with your natural resources and your environmental needs. But because there's no difference, there's really no test. So yes, we believe it was a predetermined decision. And by the way, the 9M alternative that has that one lane in each direction on the critical part of 495 doesn't really change that much, because the construction areas and the staging areas are all the same. And they're really, it saves maybe, it's insignificant is what I would say. So, and I think they did it as to throw a bone, but when you look at what the change is, it's really insignificant. So yes, I do think that's a problem.
Thank you. And a second one, Madam Chair, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So I apologize. This is the issue you may have discussed during your presentation, but some activists have identified that traffic on 270 North in the evenings will actually get worse, I think just because of the natural bottleneck effect. You can't do everything at once. I mean, I think there's some logic to it, but it's sort of hidden in the document. And I've heard that the document looks at arterial traffic overall and finds that overall traffic on arterials improves. But if you look at specific arterial roads, a lot of them will have increased traffic as a result of this. I apologize if you covered this a few minutes ago, but have you identified this? Have you been looking at this?
Yeah, well, we agree with that. That first of all, the time traveled isn't a significant savings. In fact, one woman testified that she travels from, I believe, somewhere in Prince George's to Tyson's, and she said it would change her travel distance by like 2 minutes each way, like every day.
Well, I bill in 6-minute increments, so that actually sounds pretty good. But
okay, that's right. And traveling from Rockville to Silver Spring, for example, it's a 1 minute savings. So the balance test is, how do you balance that? But the arterials are going to be impacted significantly. Now, they haven't done the study. What they say is that as part of when they select their preferred alternative in the FEIS, they're going to have to look at those arterials and the impact, because they said if there is too much change in that, for example, they may not approve a particular access point. But we don't know that yet, and they haven't done the analysis. But it's common sense to us. And I used this as an example when I was discussing it earlier, was what happens for people who want to get to 355, all of the facilities on 355, including into downtown Bethesda, they're not going to be able to do it the way it's designed. So it's going to, it absolutely will impact many of the arterials. And by the way, when they look at those, they only analyze like the next major block. They don't do a really good analysis. They're not required to do that kind of, and that's going to fall, that's going to fall in the local jurisdictions on Montgomery County and Prince George's County to figure out how they're now going to address the traffic. And so it just throws the entire local transportation planning into flux. And it is a major problem. So I do think it's significant, and we'll look at that. And we've had that as a comment. We just didn't have it as a major comment, but it is a concern that we have. And that's another area that we said they have not honored or respected the local land use planning.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. Delegate Solomon?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Carol, it's great to see you. Casey, thanks as always for lending Carol to help support our work as well, and for the work that she's been doing. Carol, I have a quick question. So I know there obviously, was a lot of fanfare made about the supposed, deal with Virginia to do the American Legion Bridge, and then, the more that we unpack things, we discovered it was literally, not even a handshake agreement, maybe just a conversation between the states. Does the fact that, well, I guess two questions within that. have you all discovered, or has there been any more progress made between the two states on that agreement, and the fact that there isn't really an agreement, even though the governor likes to speak as if there is one? Does that have any impact on the DEIS?
It does not, because it's outside of that kind of environmental review. It's just kind of an agreement. It's a who's going to pay for what. And my understanding of it was that when State Highway did its fiscal analysis of this project, the financial viability, they always assumed that that Virginia would reimburse them for any tolls that were collected on the American Legion Bridge, if in fact it went to them instead of, to Maryland. And I think that assumption was part of the financial analysis. So nobody has really been able to understand what that deal is and how does it help pay for this project when it wasn't already an assumption in the financial viability aspect. But there's not really detail in the DEIS about that because, because I think the assumption was there that Virginia would transfer those fees along, to Maryland.
Thank you.
Any other colleagues from the Land Use Committee?
I got a quick one, Madam Chair.
Delegate Moon, go ahead.
Hey, thanks for joining us, folks. And I have to admit, I probably took my eye a little bit off this project until the EIS process started rolling forward again during the pandemic. But I guess, would it be fair to say, and this is, I guess, for Carol or Casey, that we're a little bit into the unknowns now in terms of being able to project out revenue-wise where all of these things are going to be and whether these numbers are going to return back to normal, so to speak, or whether, something different will happen. And if that's true, and that, that sort of undergirds some of your legal analysis, if you're us, strategically, it seems to me that you guys are going to do what you need to do to protect the county and the department and your agency's position legally through this process. But if you're us, it sounds like we need to start really worrying about who bears the risk of these projections being off in light of what we're seeing with the purple line. And it seems like the Hogan administration just wants to plow forward. So, you're doing what you can to protect your litigation posture, but if you're us again, am I right that this is where we're at? We don't know whether these numbers are right. The administration seems to just want to move forward anyway. So all we can do really is stop the risks of these unknowns from being put on taxpayers, right?
Well, Casey, you want me to answer? Because I think that I agree that what you said, Dahlia, and that is why I believe that the legislation that I worked on with Jared in the last 2 sessions about the P3 Act generally is the most critical aspect of what you all are doing. And that's because there is no really good independent review of whether or not what the P3 and the state conclude with regard to the financial aspects of this project. We don't know how it's going to impact, and I think, looking at it, have an independent credit review, an independent review of the document itself and what's been negotiated and how strong that is with regard to us making sure that all the risks are assigned to the private entity. And, and the other question is, are those risks even manageable? Because at the end of the day, if they accept all these risks and they say, we can finance it and we're fine, but you end up with a situation like you have today where their revenues are just not what were projected and they need a bailout. And we're in the middle of that. And that's why I brought up the purple line. We're in the middle of that with the purple line. And I haven't seen the P3 document and what was negotiated between the state and the concessionaire to understand why there's such a disagreement on who should bear those costs. But that's why having a strong independent analysis and having oversight by the legislature of the P3 documents and agreements, et cetera, maybe through a special committee or something like that, is so critical, because we don't know. And right now, the P3 Act is just, we get some window dressing. You know, they make promises, and who knows if they're going to be able to keep them, and where do we end up? Because, you know, with the Purple Line, they're under construction. People's front yards are torn up, the roads are torn up, and we're stuck with trying to figure out who really bears that cost. And if it's on the state as opposed to on the private, I think it's a 700 million cost overrun right now. Even if it's only half that the state ends up paying, that's $350 million that has not been anticipated in the budgets that you all are dealing with in the next year or two, in the next several years, which is going to just get harder and harder. So I think that the most critical way of addressing your concern is in the legislation, and maybe even ramping it up some, that Delegate Solomon has introduced with the last 2 years to improve the B3 Act.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, I think the short way of thinking about it is our wheelhouse, we're most directly responsible in this NEPA process for protecting things like parkland and some of the direct, very concrete environmental impacts. At the other end of the spectrum, you're best situated to deal with things like the P3 and the big picture about the money, which is extremely important. Both those things are important. I think where we kind of meet, where there's some overlap, ideally, is on some of these issues of what is the legislator, as well as the county council in Montgomery counties, what is their idea about what we're trying to do with land use and transportation planning? That's where I think your role and our role kind of come together, and where I think we could really use some strong leadership from you, as well as our other elected at the county level, to say, we insist that any big road project include a serious transit component, period, full stop, end of discussion. So there's 3 buckets. There's our concern about protecting parkland, minimizing impact to private property, et cetera. There's your concern about the budget and not being boxed into a corner. If this thing gets out of control as far as the money goes, it could constrain legislatures well into the coming decades as to what options they have, not just for transportation, but other budget priorities in ways that would be extremely disruptive to your ability to, steer the ship of state where you want it to go. And then in the middle, there's this issue of what is our idea about what we want to be in the future. We don't want to be a pass-through driveway from Frederick County or to DC, or from Baltimore to Tyson's Corner or whatever. We want Montgomery County to have a set of transportation infrastructure that is consistent with land use policies that are based on a sound set of ideas about not only planning, but economic development and the way that we want to encourage our communities to look and feel and be experienced into the future. And I think that's something that is sort of hard to pin down because it's not quite directly in the NEPA process. It's sort of indirectly involved. It's not quite in the budget process, although it's implicated by things like, will there be money left over for transit? But in some ways, that's the most important issue of all, is what is this project going to do to the shape of our communities for generations to come? I think that's what we both need to kind of try to focus on, to bring that to the surface and insist that the state confront explicitly what are the implications of this project for those objectives.
Other questions? Okay, I have a question. It's sort of going back to baseline EIS 101. Carol, you've brought up a number of things that are not in the EIS that are very concerning, not the least of which are communities that will be ripped apart, cemeteries that haven't been taken into account, environmental justice issues. If these things are not in the EIS, what is the impact of that? What does that mean that they're not in there?
Well, if those are areas that I know, and they are required in the FEIS, the final environmental impact statement is what triggers, and the ROD, the record of decision, is what triggers the ability to litigate and challenge the project. The DEIS is what this review is supposed to do, is the draft environmental impact statement is supposed to provide kind of the issues to, as Casey said very early, is to preserve our rights to challenge what is missing from the final environmental impact statement. So that's what we're trying to do now. And by saying these things are missing or were insufficient, if they address them sufficiently in the final environmental impact statement, that could help. But the problem that we have with that is we can't look at it, the real substance of it. I'll take, one example where they're completely kicked the can on the social justice issue. They're supposed to provide at least the basics that they have of how they have looked at it, how they've addressed it. Then when we get to the final environmental impact statement, it's going to stick us in, we'll say, well, you didn't do a good enough job. So it's going to have to, it would trigger some litigation to basically require that they improve it. But it's not like you can do it informally like we're doing now, which is to provide comments to make sure that the DEIS is on the right track to get to a final environmental impact statement that does cover all the bases. And so I think what happens is it creates unnecessary litigation. It pushes you into a more formal process of challenging the regulatory reviews of the project. And again, that leads to delays, and it leads to cost. And so I think that's a problem. And it is important to talk about, as much as what's in there and not done well, is to talk about what's not in there. Mm-hmm. Excuse me.
Thank you. Colleagues, you're awfully quiet this morning. Anybody else have questions? No? Wow. One other thing that I was thinking about as I was looking at your presentation to the Commission on July 15 and reading through the documents, there seems to be so much that hasn't been taken into account about the local land use and the local planning, not the least of which was when they brought up the Prince George's County Hospital, and that there was no access to the hospital coming southbound, which is where most of the traffic will be coming. I guess I don't really have a question, but more it's stunning to me that there hasn't been this level of connection with, and maybe that is my question. What sort of outreach are you all getting from a SHA to understand your plans, what the goal is for our county and Prince George's County, so that can be taken into account?
Well, I will tell you one thing, that we meet with State Highway on these individual meetings for individual issues, okay? And I will tell you that when they first provided their access plan, that they left the hospital out, whatever, they also did not include anything related to FDA on the South County, that's going to be in off of New Hampshire Avenue. The growth of the FDA and the Viva White Oak project, which is huge. They're huge. I mean, we're talking about 8,000 additional employees, and I don't even know how many residents are going to go out there. They had not even considered it. And, we pushed them, and then they added access so people would not have to drive take 29 to get, that they could actually, use the managed lanes if possible to get to New Hampshire Avenue. They listened to us there. Prince George's County has been just asking over and over again I would say that there is no, they're not being, they respond. They respond to us when we raise the issues. Sometimes well, sometimes not. But they're not looking at us. State Highway has never been looking at us as a real partner in trying to help them develop and establish what would be really worthwhile. They're not respecting or honoring the incredible amount of talent and expertise and experience that we have in our local jurisdictions. And in fact, it goes back to one of the very first things that I did when I took this project, when I was assigned this project, was I requested staffing from the State Highway Administration. We have no funding for this. We're just pulling, all the work that the staff is doing, and there's a lot of technical staff working on this. We're just pulling from other assigned projects. They gave us, I asked for 13 different areas for help. The response was, and they gave us one part-time person in Montgomery and one part-time person in Prince George's, assigned to parks. They said to us that the only reason that we are a cooperating agency, that we were assigned as a cooperating agency, is because we own parkland. They did not look at our planning, the planning aspects of what we do. They ignored it. They said it's not relevant to us because it's not, we have our own, we go through what COG tells us. So it's been frustrating from the very beginning to get their attention. And we finally made it clear to them that the planning, the commissioners cannot and will not convey any of the parkland unless they are comfortable that best practices in land use and transportation planning have been used, and we can help you. And they just are not looking at our planning folks as a part. They're not looking at us as partners at all. They're just asking for our responses to their to what they are coming up with, and it's very frustrating. It's very frustrating.
Understandably.
So that's the process. It's just they give us something and ask us to respond to it. They don't ask us up front to help them identify or design something that might work. That was the whole thing with the ICC. That's been a big deal for us because we do. It's not perfect, and there are people that aren't going to like it. But from a standpoint, that's the outer beltway in a sense. That is the managed lanes for a portion of 495.
Right. But
they aren't looking at it and ways to deal with that, and that's very frustrating. So the process has been. It's really not been a partnership.
So speaking of partnerships, I've gotten a question. Is there a plan for Montgomery County and Prince George's County? I understand that you all are working together. I saw that in the previous meeting, but is there a plan for the counties to present a united front in asking a lot of these questions and pushing back against this sort of rush to build?
Well, the commission is working very closely on both sides. I have a counterpart, Deborah Borden in Prince George's, and she's managing their side of it. I don't know I don't know how the councils are working together. I do know, for example, when WSSC said that the costs were, going to be closer to $2 billion than $500 million, that both councils issued a statement together that said, we're not approving rate increases to the ratepayers as a result of this project. So they did work together there, and I do think that they're continuing to work. The problem is that a lot of the issues that the counties have, not necessarily the commission, are not really, they don't overlap that much. But they were concerned, for example, when they added the 95 portion in the ICC because they said, that's all in Prince George's County. Now you're impacting our, natural resources so you're trading us off. So, and I do have to also tell you that the frustration that Prince George's has is even greater because they're also the same people in the county and in the commission are dealing with not just this project, but the 295 issue, the Barnum Washington Parkway and Maglev. So they are stretched so thin, but we are trying to work together. And I know that our departments, the two transportation departments are talking as well. But, so I don't know where the counties are going to come together, but everything we do, we try to bring in Prince George's. I mean, I've dealt with the Prince George's Department of Transportation folks who are dealing with this, as well as with ours, Chris Conklin, and so we're trying to bring everybody together and do it as a. I think it'll be stronger, particularly in the legislature, because you'll have both delegations to address and push these things.
Right.
So,
I have another question that came in. With major concerns from Purple Line lesson learned, post-COVID traffic patterns, lack of key environmental impacts, how is this project not on pause to reevaluate? And it seems like the only way to address so many of these is going to be litigation. I mean, I think we all see this as heading for litigation. Any insights as to why this is not on pause?
I would tell you one of the issues is that when this project was originally proposed, it was one of the NEPA projects that was held up as an example by the White House to say, this is the reason we think we hate NEPA, and this is the reason we want to change NEPA, and this is the reason which they've done, and this is the reason that we there is a executive order from the White House that requires that they get from the NEPA process, from the notice of intent to the approval, the final environmental impact statement in 2 years, which has never been done before. And it's not, there's been a lot of delays, but that's why they're pushing so hard to get it done in a certain, this is a project that is being watched by the federal government very closely. In fact, the Federal Highway Administration is being just as difficult as the state. And I think that the state highway administration relies on the federal highway to basically give those no answers. Like, for example, when so many elected officials requested, in addition to private citizens and organizations, requested an extension of the comment period for this, what is now a 19,000-page document with 90 days to review it. They asked for an additional 30 days. I mean, I know you all were part of that. The answer that State Highway gave to the council, to the county council's T&E committee was, we don't object to it, but we're not, we told them we don't object to it. But they're not asking for, they're not supporting it. They're just not objecting. Well, what does that do? What does that say? So I think the question is, what is the federal I think they're getting a lot of pressure from the Federal Highway Administration to move this thing forward. That's all they keep asking is about your dates and your timing and, making sure it's done quickly. So that's, I think, where a lot of pressure is coming from.
Wow. And another question that just came in, who has oversight of the financial implications of this project?
I guess that's the Board of Public Works or you all. Well, you don't really, it's part of the P3 Act. And that's why the P3 Act, that's why the revisions to the P3 Act are so important. Right now, it's the Board of Public Works. They get recommendations and review from several agencies, I believe from the Treasurer and from the Office of Legislative Oversight, but that's where it comes from. I mean, it's whatever's in the P3 Act. And there is no independent financial analysis that we're aware of under that act as it exists today.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, anyone, any other questions? Well, Carol, you're amazing. Thank you for all the work, the millions of hours that you have put into this.
Yeah, I live in this.
Really appreciate your expertise and your
Thank you.
analysis and your thoughtfulness and your generosity of time. So thank you. And Casey, thank you very much. Colleagues, I appreciate your time this morning, and seeing no other questions, I think we will conclude early.
I just
Any
want to
last
offer,
comments?
obviously, I want to offer, if anybody does have questions afterwards, I mean, I'm always available to answer those questions, and, it's fine. I'm happy to do so.
And I can attest
This is my community as well. So I not only does it matter to me from the aspect of doing my job, but I live here. I live in Montgomery County, and not too far from the Beltway. And it really matters to me what my community is like. And I appreciate all the efforts that you all give as well.
Thank you. Casey, any last comments for us to close us out?
I think we really appreciate your attention to this, and we're at I think it's an important stage of the process for all of you to really weigh in hard on the idea that the state just can't proceed on this path. Because I think we all want to be constructive here, and we don't want to just say no, but we also, I think, don't want to get run over. And unfortunately, that's what's happened to this point. And I think without your help, frankly, that's what's going to continue to happen. So we're counting on you.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate your time. And with that, we are concluded. Have a great day.
Thank you.